Today on the Self Smarter podcast.
As leaders, when you're in that position, whether you have an audience of 1, 100, 1,000, 10,000, being conscious of the total way that you're showing up, so your complete presence is very important. Hi, we're Danelle and Megan, the hosts of this conversation-centric podcast for leaders seeking to be better every day. Whether you choose to be a leader in the workplace, at home, or in your community, we believe the most effective leaders are equipped to not only be self-starters, but self-smarter.
Hello, and welcome to Self Smarter. I'm Megan, and this is my friend and co-host, Danelle.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. Oh, now you're going to sing.
I thought I beat you to it.
Woo! Look at you. I love it. Maybe we should sing the song together.
Let's do it.
Wouldn't everybody love everybody? 1, 2, 3. Just kidding.
No, we need a little practice.
It's a joke. Yeah. So I had to tell you right at the top, this is so fun for me and us at our age.
Oh, boy.
Because
the age
I know. Well, it is what it is.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So I went to Total Wine to restock some things that had been drank over the holidays. You know how you do.
Yes, well, I know I was at your house, so I'm sure you needed to restock.
No, you brought plenty of wine. It was from all the other holidays that kept going.
Okay.
Which we did love that wine, side note. Anyway, I got carded when I went to check out.
Well, good for you.
And I asked the woman, I said, listen, thank you. First of all, thank you. Second, really? Really? And she goes, I mean it, really. I need to see your license, young lady.
So it was like not a corporation. It wasn't a policy.
No.
It was a choice.
I never get carded there.
Okay.
Well,
did you say thank you?
I did. I said, first of all, thank you. Flattered. Second, are you being serious? Like, I just turned 40. This was like my birthday.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
by the way, happy belated birthday.
Thank you. I'm 47. I'm proud of it. And this woman carded me. So then we got into this whole thing about, like, I'm standing there. I'm like, is this Self Smarter? I think it is. Because I was helping her. I'm like, listen, what is your benchmark? Like, how old do you think I look? She goes, we are supposed to check if you look under the age of 40. Now that I'll take.
Yes. And if I were her, I would lead with that. I would say,
listen,
we have a policy that anyone under 40, we have to card. And I think you fit that criteria. Would you please show me your license? Like, that would be a winning way to do that.
Do you accept hugs as a form of thanks and or tips and or bottles of wine?
Yes. Well, I'm sure she's not
so
offering
awesome.
That. That's great. Well, maybe for those of you who are watching us, like, you have a headband on today. It's very youthful.
I'm trying to look very youthful.
It's working.
Actually, I'm just trying to pull my hair in my eyes.
Oh, okay. Well, I need probably a headband too. So for those of you watching, if you're interested, we could put our face regime, since we are often. In fact, that just happened to me. I just met someone on a trip, and they literally were arguing with me that I was 50 years old.
Isn't that great?
Yes. And I volunteered my age because of the context of the conversation. And the conversation was going really well. In fact, I need to tell you about it. It was a business lead.
Okay, yeah.
And I threw her off when I said, well, when I turned 50 and I was just going on with the combo, it threw her off. She couldn't recover that I was 50, which, again, is a form of a compliment.
It is, but you're like, man,
wow,
I earned this 50.
I did. And she goes, well, I don't know what you're doing, but I need to take notes, because I think she was like in her young 40s. And I was like, well, thank you. And, so anyway, but we could put our face routines, because they're similar in the show notes.
They are very similar. We did the same thing for at least 10 years, which I think is critical. From mid-30s to mid-40s, you must get into a regime. And I think
all
men
listeners
should too. Yes.
Yeah, no, I mean all listeners. Take care of your skin.
Take care of your skin. It's your largest organ. Why are we ignoring it? Let's go. Okay, so look in the show notes if you're interested in face washes, creams, and stuff.
Jordan will not put that stuff in there, but whatever. You just text us. Text us. Just text us.
I'll sneak it. All right. I also wanted to mention I always listen to our podcast.
Well, so do I.
I know.
And it's fun because I forget things that we do.
Totally.
I remember like how I felt when it's over. I can be a little bit critical of me, like, oh, I didn't show up, or, oh, I didn't necessarily, or I can be like, that went pretty smoothly.
Right.
but I forget some of the things that
happen.
And
Then it's
that could be an age issue, or it could just be like when you're recording. I talked to Mackie about it. She goes, no, like
a
when you
blackout.
pour it in,
Yes.
you're pouring into this performance of sorts. You can forget certain aspects of it. And then when it's played back to you, it's refreshing or scary.
Right.
Depends on, but most of the time it's refreshing.
Right.
So,
It is.
yeah.
And you know what was refreshing? There was an imperfection moment.
Okay,
I think
there's a
it
lot
was-
of them.
No, not like this. It was last week or the week before last.
Uh-huh.
I think it was gaslighting.
Okay.
If y'all are interested to hear Danelle do this. But you couldn't say the word manipulation. It was so funny. And I was thinking to myself, just so y'all know, listeners, we are always tempted to stop and say, take that out.
Yes.
So I remember thinking
She's going to stop.
she's going to stop it, and she didn't.
Well, because I was trying to practice what we preach. I'm
So proud of you. And then I didn't even realize it again until I was listening to it.
how many times did it take for me to get there?
You're like, manipulate. What was that cartoon character? That's all, folks.
I think that was Bugs
Kinda
Bunny.
like one of
But-
them. It was a Looney Tune moment. But that's cool.
Okay. All right.
That's
well,
cool.
thanks for pointing that out
That
to everyone.
happens.
But I do hope y'all listen to that episode, because I think gaslighting is something that we either don't know
not
about
gaslighting
or
right
we want to ignore. But it's I've gotten some good input on that episode, and thanks for us talking about that. So that was episode
Question.
42? 44,
40, yeah,
45,
same
somewhere in
45.
there. David's throwing
It
up
might
his
be
hands.
45. I
Okay.
think he's right.
All right.
We can
Anyway,
count on David.
it's easy. Just go look for gaslighting.
Exactly. Okay. So
right.
before we talk about
Manipulate. Just want to show you that I can do it.
Oh, look at you. You did so well. Can you say it 3 times fast?
No.
Okay. Well, before
At happy hour.
Okay, let's try that.
Okay.
All right, let's jump to commercial. Happy New Year, Self Smarter listeners. We're so grateful that you're hanging with us each week and doing the work and focusing on your leadership growth. Because you're so amazing, we've decided to offer you a gift. We've got Self Smarter desk calendars for 2023 that we're happy to ship right to your door if you want. To get one of these nifty calendars, all you have to do is go to selfsmarterpodcast.com, fill out the form, and our team will send you one to keep you on track and motivated in 2023. If not, that's okay too. Before we get into improving our presence as leaders, which is very important on so many different levels,
Yeah.
I want to be very transparent and say out loud that this topic today in particular, improving our presence, is something you and I both work on all the time. I don't know that we do it like outwardly, but I know we work on it differently and individually, meaning how am I showing up? You have helped me over the years, set me straight in some areas, and I know we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But I just want to note before we start giving people advice and talking about this, I want y'all, our listeners, to know that this is an ongoing thing. This is this is not us professing to be perfect. This is us professing that we're working on this all the time.
Yeah. Presence is,
Yes.
I think what you can, it's one of those things. And if you look at the leadership or things that we're taught, it's a topic that's not really focused on a lot, is your presence, like how you physically
Yes.
are showing up. And that could be verbal. That could literally be your standing, your stature,
Your fashion.
But it could be a lot of different things. And I think it stems from really a lot of what we talk about here starts with self-awareness. And what precedes self-awareness is self-knowledge. And so understanding how you are wired is one aspect of understanding your presence. Understanding, you can pick your Enneagram type, are you introvert, extrovert, whatever it may be. Are you talkative? Are you, more introspective? Understanding those things, but then also understanding your physical presence in a room. And sometimes what that requires is asking someone to observe you, which a lot of leaders will not do. And that's a hard thing to do because it requires an intense amount of trust. And then sometimes what you're going to hear back is not always the most flattering of things. And I had to experience a lot of that. And again, what I'll say is that my leader, my style, I'm charismatic, I'm extroverted. So I didn't pay a lot of attention to those because I tend to get people's attention. I can lead a conversation. I don't have a lot of reserve relative to speaking in front of people. I still get butterflies and always have, but I will do it.
Yes. And clutch.
Well, thank you, but not always was I aware. And I'm talking stances. Like we've talked about the scowl on my face at times where you thought, are you angry? And I was like, no, I'm just thinking. But those things matter because as leaders, when you're in that position, whether you have an audience of 1, 100, 1,000, 10,000, being conscious of the total way that you're showing up, so your complete presence is very important. And I don't think, and this is probably going to be a little bit more of a lean episode relative, because there's not a lot out there on this topic, but I find it to be critically important. And I would love to make this statement, but I'm going to, but I also want to almost correct myself. I think it's very important for women, but I can tell you it's equally important for men. So if we want to think about presence for a minute, just close your eyes and think about politicians for a moment. There are so many amazing examples of what to do and what not to do with both female and males. And so it's an interesting study when you look. They're trained. You could also plug in media personalities or actors or celebrities. You can think about that for a moment. But for us everyday leaders,
yes,
it's important for us to understand and be conscious of this because we're not necessarily surrounded by groups of people who are giving us the training and the cues to do this. So that's why we decided to talk about it.
We did.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's something, as having a kid in high school, we talk a lot about, my son is so, and your daughter is as well, attuned to the leadership, the notion of leadership and what that looks like because their parents are leaders. My son said, just the other day, I said something about a teacher. I said, is there respect for that teacher in the class as a good leader? And he goes, no, he doesn't have respect.
Oh.
And I said, why do you think that is? And he said, because he never established his presence at the beginning of the school year. He did not establish his, I will say, he said dominance as a leader.
Oh.
And I said, well, is that a good thing or a bad thing? He goes, it's only a bad thing because he's getting run over. They do not respect him. So anyway, it's important and it begs respect.
Right.
Even if it's a passive
Yeah,
way.
because I think your presence, it's often sometimes what you're not saying and how, or also maybe
what you're allowing,
and maybe it's not necessarily what you're saying, but it's the questions you're asking. So it all plays into your complete presence.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's get started with number one. So our first way to improve your presence as a leader is to be authoritative,
Okay.
but not scary. Big difference.
Big difference.
We have seen the two.
I've practiced both ways.
I don't know that I've ever been scary, but like one time when I wigged out, but
Oh, I remember that time.
yes, that one time.
I'm just saying she was scary and everybody was scared except for me. I was dying laughing in my office, but then I had to go out and correct her. But that's another story for another day.
It was funny. It was funny. But what we need to do is ask ourselves, do I convey trustworthiness relative to my competence as a leader, relative to my reliability? Do these people see me that way? And are my motives true?
Yeah.
Do they believe me? So when it comes to competence at DMA, my question I always ask myself is, am I good at what we do? Am I good at what we do? As a marketer, can I say I'm good at that? My answer must be yes. So if there's ever an area that I'm not good at, man, I'm diving into it with that person because I want to know what the heck is going on.
Right.
Do I show incredible acumen, in other words, relative to this area of expertise? That's the way to establish your competence. Reliability, do I show up on time? You straighten me out on this one. And that was, we do this not on purpose. I don't show up late to meetings every day because I want to.
No. Yeah, it was the demands of the business.
Yeah. Well, and as a 9, I'm allowing meetings to drag on longer than they need to drag on. We finished that conversation 10 minutes ago. Let's go. I've got another meeting. That's where I am now. But it took me, you sitting me down going, listen, sister, they're counting on you. You need to be there on time. Okay. So do I show up on time? Do I answer the phone, emails, text, calls for help and guidance? Am I reliable?
Right.
If I just ignore a text for a week, is that person going to be comfortable with me? Is that showing up well as a leader? So this is passive showing up. This is not necessarily physically showing up.
Yeah, and I want to make a point there too. You know, you certainly pointed yourself out relative to your timeliness, and that was something you had to work on. One of the things that I think you've brought to our organization that has really helped too is when it comes to answering emails or responding to things. One of the things that I don't know if you intentionally did it, but your practice is, I've received this, I'll get back to you, versus
just letting
because
it
I think
sit.
what we do is we like, oh, I don't have the time to give it a full thought. And most of the time, if we're not responding, it's because we have a good intention. And then sometimes by the time we get back around to it, we might have lost it, which happens to me all the time. Or, you know, we haven't responded to that person. So they're just sitting there. So again, relative to reliability, sometimes it's just setting the other person up that you have received that information, and when you can, you will get back to them, or asking them, when do you need this back, if they haven't been clear in their communications with you. So I think that, again, with reliability, that doesn't mean being on call in the moment.
Yes.
And we have to work on that.
An acknowledgement.
Yes.
Really. And you do that
And that
too.
can be with external clients and internal colleagues as well.
Right.
So
You know, it's like you do that too. Noted. I don't have all the answers. Let me think on it. You know, and I appreciate that. It's like, okay,
yeah. When's our deadline to know
Got
this,
it.
or when do we need to have
Yeah.
this by? Yeah.
And then motives. Are my motives in a healthy spot?
Okay.
Okay. Do I really want this team to win? Do I really want this business to win? You're going to have times in your job, in your work, in your career, where you're going to get frustrated.
Yeah.
You're going to get tired. But you always call it, is my heart in the right place? I think it's the same thing. You know, you have to take a step back as a leader to go, is my heart in the right place? Are my motives clean? Like, am I doing this for the right reasons? You know, we talk a lot about, we actually don't talk about it on the podcast. I have conversations with people a lot about money. Money is not everything. You know, it is something. If you're working for money, maybe that's your circumstance, but is that really why you're doing it? Well, we just had this conversation with our producer. So where are my motives? Are they genuine in nature relative to what I'm trying to achieve beyond the money? My happiness, my security, my future, all of those things, my family's future. Okay. And do I want these people to win? Do I want this business to win? People can smell it if you don't.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So that's my first bit of advice. What about you? Do you have an advice?
Yeah. I mean, I think relative to authority, I think the number one thing is to think about, you know, meeting the level of energy of your team.
You're so good at that.
Where they are. I had to learn that though, because I can come in a guns a-blazing. But when the team is, you have to be able to, I don't know, we call it read a room.
Yeah.
Again, understand where your audience is. And that means being conscious of, if you're in a challenging time as an organization, showing up with pom-poms on can seem almost like not authentic. Like, speaking of gaslighting,
Yes.
you know, that could be perceived as that particular thing. So I think that is critical. I think finding authority in your intentions rather than leaning into your roles and responsibilities. So yes, you may have a certain title, you may have a certain decision-making power at an organization, but I think the authority is, as you're talking about, like in your intentions and motives. Like, I think that's very critical, and shift away from making egocentric statements and be conscious when you have selfish thoughts. We can all be selfish, and we can all be ego-driven. And I think people most often associate egos with external actions, but I can promise you, we are all battling internal egos. And we have to keep those things being in check. That ego can look like always having to be right, like never admitting fault, being in control of things that other people can also be in control of, being including, or like for us, like one of the things that we've dealt with relative to this podcast is being perfect or speaking perfect. And I think that was a good thing to kind of open up this podcast about, because that was something that I really struggled early on. And we did have a lot more cuts early on in publishing this podcast because I wanted things to be pristine. Now, do I want our podcast to be, speaking of authority and presence, I want you to know that you're getting good content, that it's presentable to you, that it's an enjoyable experience. But we also can do that by being not always completely perfect. And so I think those are some of the ways to increase your authority. And so what it is instead of forcing your authority is, in another way is to think about it, is earning it.
Yes.
By really thinking about, like what you talked about, competence, reliability, and motives. And so I do think that those are critical relative to honing your authority.
Right.
And not being scary.
That's right. And, to your point, people, we've said this a million times here at DMA, maybe not that many, but a lot. You can't lead if you don't have followers.
Correct.
How do you get the followers? Mm-hmm. That's what you basically just mentioned.
Yes.
There's one more thing too, is you mentioned egocentric. And I think something that you did really well with DMA was you focused on the mission versus your passion for fresh food. You had the passion for fresh food.
Yeah.
You knew you could solve marketing problems in our industry. Mm-hmm. However, really what you leaned into early was the mission. Mm-hmm. And that brought everyone with you. That brought me with you.
Yeah.
I love that you cared about fresh fruits and vegetables. I do too. Mm-hmm. But long term, I don't know. Like maybe, we've had people be like, oh, my passion is air travel. I don't know, like making aeronautics.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Sure.
And so I don't want to go forward. No. What we're trying to do is mission based. It's different.
Right.
It's not personal here. It's a bigger deal. And so that is a way to kind of ease people into the authority. Yeah.
And I think having a mission, and, you talk about leaders and followers. And when we use that terminology, my skin crawls a little if I'm being really off. No, leaders and followers. Oh. Yeah. I'll circle back to mission in a second. Because what I want to say about that, one of the things that I know in my leadership journey, because of the weight of the responsibility of leading, and not just leading, but owning this business, I felt like I had to be me personally out front all of the time. And in my view, it was to protect and to ensure everyone's success at this company. So I would put myself out there. What I realized is that what I should put out there is the thing that we're all, that's really leading us, is our mission and our purpose. Now, sometimes I'm on the front lines. It depends on what's going on in the organization. But most of the time, it's the rest of the team on the front lines. And I'm in the back supporting and cheering and doing those type of things. And so as a leader who's seeking to, again, be more authoritative, but without being scary, is to know how to tee up the direction. And it's not always you pointing. Get everyone on board where they're going, and give them the map, and then lead from all different positions within the group.
Yes.
In order to, honestly, again, to improve your presence. Don't always think that your presence is out front. That's my point that I'm trying to make.
That's a good one. Mm-hmm. Okay. Number 2, lead with confidence. Mm-hmm. So we should be asking ourselves, am I putting my attention or my inner critic, or am I connecting with my audience? Like, which am I doing? Am I worrying about my inner critic?
Okay.
Or am I connecting with my audience?
Mm-hmm. So inner critic, talk to me about that.
Okay. So the inner voice that expresses criticism, frustration, or disapproval about our actions inside our heads. That little voice inside our heads. It may sound like you should have. Why didn't you do that? What's wrong with you?
Could be better, yeah. And I think most of us will agree that inner voice can be pretty critical at times.
But if you're focusing on that, you're really not engaging with the audience as a leader.
Right.
And so you've left behind your team potentially. So are you connecting? So the difference between fighting with yourself and this inner critic versus connecting. Connecting being joining or linking things together.
Okay.
Okay. So there's a definite difference there. Do you have any advice on confidence?
Yeah, I think, again, it kind of circles back to a little bit of what we've already said, but part of being confident or being seen as confident so that others will have confidence in the organization and you as a leader is to really think about how you're communicating and the purpose of your communicating. So again, having awareness around, am I going to be in front of this group? Am I on a one-on-one? And being able to shift your again, how you're prepared to have those either presentations or conversations, and being able to state clearly what success looks like. And then you're going to be able to work on the connection piece of it. So I think that's important when we're leading with confidence. If people are going to see you confident, it's when you're able to articulate clearly the point you're trying to make, the vision you're trying to cast, the problem you're trying to find a solution to. You fill in the blank. And that doesn't mean that you always come to the table with answers.
No.
Sometimes confidence is gained when you literally can say, here's an opportunity for us. Here's what I know to be true about this circumstance. And now I'm going to open the floor for your ideas and your input. That establishes confidence as much as you knowing, subject matter expert on XYZ or knowing the answer to the question. Sometimes confidence, and many times it's fostered when you allow others to provide their input and feedback. So I think that's very important. And then I think another way to lead with confidence is to be explicit about your expectations. Mm-hmm. And, to be unclear is to be unkind. Mm-hmm. And we know that personally, but it certainly is the truth within organizations. So being explicit about your expectations is critically important. And I think people, even if they don't always agree, they're going to see you showing up with more confidence. So I think that's what I would add to that particular bit of advice. So
I want to say, just sort of vulnerably, and for just a healthy anecdote, that you lead well the way that you just said. Here's where we're going. Here it is. Now, I want you here. I know step 1, 2, and 3 look like this, and I know at some point we're going to have to touch this. Now, I would like for you all, not just me, I'm saying like the team.
The team, yeah.
To come up with the tactical elements that are going to happen all along the way. You're really good at that, giving people the opportunity to do that.
Now.
Yes.
It took me a while to figure that out.
I don't know. Okay. You've been pretty good.
Wow. I like the compliment.
Whereas I have learned by that. And so I'm a get into the weeds person on how we're going to get things done. So I'm having to train myself sometimes to not have all the answers from I'm talking about marketing now.
Sure.
From a marketing perspective on how we're going to get there. A lot of times I struggle with, maybe this is overconfident. I don't know. I'm really being very vulnerable right now.
Yeah.
If someone says, I know I need to get X amount of results by the end of 2023, I know exactly how to do it. That doesn't mean I should tell them.
Correct.
So I've got to use it as a teaching tool. Anyway, this is just all kind of coming to me as I'm listening to you share about your advice. I'm thinking, wow, you're right. You taught me how that looks. I know how that looks. And now I'm trying to get myself into the mode of thinking that way. I love giving people answers.
Of course. We're solutions
so fun.
Providers.
Yeah. It doesn't make me feel better about myself. It really doesn't. I think some numbers have that. Some people have that.
Yeah, and I think it's, if you're
down to it.
Yeah, but if you're wired to be helpful,
yes.
Sometimes helpfulness is not what's necessary at the moment, especially when you're trying to establish yourself as a trusted leader. So which includes your presence. Sometimes not fixing the task at hand, because even though you may have an answer that will solve that problem, there's usually, in most cases, more than one way to solve a problem or to help someone.
Yes, that's right.
So, and then sometimes when you become that person that's always fixing it, then it becomes expected that you are. So then when you don't, there's a gap there of
Yes.
confidence in you as a leader. And so that's a little bit of a trap that we can, with all the best intentions in the world, find ourselves in.
Yes.
And I've stepped into that plenty of times as a parent.
Yeah.
Solving things.
good
I mean,
example.
solving things for Mackie Payton over and over and over
Yeah.
again. Then you start to realize, wait a minute, I'm doing her, even though I know probably some great answers to that or great solutions to whatever she's dealing with, how's that helping her establish that ability herself? And if you don't have the type of team at your company that you can trust to come up with solutions other than what you have in your mind as the leader or a leader in the organization, then that says something, A, about your leadership, B, about the culture of your company. And so it's an indicator if you are unable to do that with the group that you're leading, whether inside the office, outside.
I'm telling you, listeners, if you're listening to this right now, it's a fine line. It's a fine balance of when to know when to give the grace to let someone do the work. Like, you have the vision, they do the work to learn for themselves, to become awesome, versus you just handing the answer.
Yeah.
It's a real fine balance, right? And so also the way you show up relative to what we just talked about, authoritative with confidence. You're either steamrolling or you're sort of this rollover type person who knows everything, which I was vulnerable of becoming. The nice guy who gets rolled over but has a lot of answers, you know? So I've had to really work on that. Where do you stand, listeners, in all of what we're talking about? Do you see yourself in this? Do you know someone? It's time for you to align with someone you trust very much who can give you this type of feedback.
And I think establishing your presence, you know, a leader, I think we're using a lot of words around leading a particular group. But I think that what we're talking about today is equally important in an organization that you may not be leading that particular group. But if if you're trying to establish yourself within a group, whether you're a designated leader or not, again, we designate ourselves as leaders, these are things that we know to be true if you're trying to improve your presence within any group.
Yes.
Any group.
Any setting.
Any setting. So I want to make that point before we keep going forward.
That's really a good point. And then you mentioned it in terms of our third, the big thing to do and to remember, if you can, just these 1, 2, 3, authoritative, confidence, and clear.
Clear.
You said it. To be clear is to be kind. We should ask ourselves, is my intention clear to my audience? Am I easy, and I put in parentheses, or hard to follow? This is where it's critical to have a buddy.
It is.
Who's like, man, I think you nailed it in the first 3 minutes, and then I think you lost it somewhere.
Okay, I know what's coming. I'm
Around
thinking we're
here.
about to talk about my 50-page PowerPoints that I used to present on financials.
Maybe, yeah. If anything, it is financials.
Usually
Where
in this
people like their eyes start to cross.
Well, in a
or
marketing
gloss
organization,
over.
for sure.
Yeah, creative people, they're like, no, what? Can we have a brainstorm? You know. So I'm just saying, are you showing up? Even if you're giving a presentation, to your point, to 1,000 people, 10,000 people, or a room of 5, are you showing up and saying, here's what I'm expecting to do, and here's how I need you to follow me right now, or here's what I need you to know at the end of this deal?
Yeah, and I think, too, like, in all of the walks of this journey that we've been on, leadership as thought leaders in the industry, I mean, I was lucky to have you with me, and I could take your feedback because I knew I wasn't connecting. Like, there was a big period of time when I was making presentations externally to our industry, or when, even to the company, where I could just see and I could feel the disconnect. And it didn't matter how, and this is the point, it didn't matter how hard I prepared. It didn't matter the hours and hours I put into the PowerPoint or the graphics and the presentation. I kept thinking it was those things that mattered. What I was missing was my delivery. And I was relying on my natural
entertainer type.
Yeah, I am. Literally, the sevens are entertainers. So I was relying on my ability not to be shy in front of people and to be able to speak up or to be able to present. That being said, I wasn't effective, and I could feel it because I could feel the energy.
And you were frustrated.
I was very frustrated because I just kept working harder, and I kind of applied that saying as if you just work harder at it or if you prepare more. And so I would just more and more and more hours, and I wasn't getting any new results.
Right.
And then I just did something real simple. Meg, like, could you take some notes for me? Like, what am I missing here? Because it wasn't that you didn't understand me. It was almost like you could read through.
Yes.
Because you knew me well enough to know, or you knew the subject matter well enough to know that you could read maybe some of the cues that I was missing. So it wasn't as impactful to you. But for the audience of whether it was our team or hundreds of people in a room at an event, you started paying attention more to those things so that you could give me feedback. And I know we've talked about that, but I think it was a real critical point for me to ask and then for you to be on the ready to help me make that transition. And it literally really transformed how I was able to connect with the company about where we were going. It was growing, we were growing. And then also my abilities to present to a greater group improved drastically. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting because I had to prepare less for presentations, not more, which blew me away.
Yeah,
trust myself.
You did, yeah.
Yeah.
No, you became yourself.
Okay, I like that.
I think this is probably a thing for leaders, period, relative to their presence is it's almost like it's in alignment with imposter syndrome because we all innately as human beings feel like we're imposters. Mm-hmm. We show up to show you we're not.
Correct.
Okay? Mm-hmm. The minute you took all that garb off and you just became you, humility showed up to the party, empathy showed up to the party, warmth showed up to the party. Yeah,
I was showing up a bit rigid because I felt like I needed to be the smart, like I had to know not the smartest person in the room, but I had to be the smartest person about that particular subject, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And I was carrying a lot of unnecessary energy into these interactions with these audiences that I wanted to honestly provide.
And it changed. Everything.
It did.
It changed the way audiences receive you on a big scale. Mm-hmm. It changed the way the business respond. It changed the way customers, the industry itself. Yes. Mm-hmm. So it is and can be absolutely transformational. The question for our listeners is do you relate? Number one. And two, do you have somebody that you can talk to about these things?
Yeah, and I think too, reflecting, it just popped in my head, so this is definitely not something we've talked about, but one of the people that I studied when I was trying to figure out how can I, because this, in alignment with being obviously a more effective leader, I was also trying to become more of an effective presenter. I studied Steve Jobs. And so there's several books out there just based on his presentation style and him as a storyteller. And that will be the other thing I'll just throw in, and it may not align directly with what we're sharing today, but if we are trying to be clearer, because that's the kind way, in order to be clear, sometimes we have to be more effective storytellers. Yes. So studying that piece of it, and so I would recommend that y'all listen to the episode with Adria Peters. It was in November or December, but on storytelling and creativity. I think that was a great episode on how to hone those skills. But studying Steve Jobs was also one of the things that I did when I became aware that I had all the information, I had the knowledge, and I had the confidence to get up and speak. What I was missing was, again, I was bringing too much in my bag. I didn't need to bring all that. Mm-hmm. I just needed to effectively tell the story so that the audience was receiving information in a way that made them feel, again, more connected to what I was trying to share. And therefore, I improved my presence.
Mm-hmm. So. You did. And you've got some tips here on being clear. And I think I know everybody that's listening to this may go, okay, but I think these are good lessons that I have observed you do. Mm-hmm. So I thought it would be helpful if you shared.
Yeah, I think if you're, talking to an audience, one of the things that I had to work on was I would always stand behind a podium or stand stationary because I had all of these notes because I didn't want to miss one detail, one iota. And I decided that was not effective. So I learned to.
That was one peeling of a layer.
Well, yeah. And then that also ties back into storytelling.
Yes.
And I began to walk.
Yes.
And pace.
Yes.
And what I did by doing that was I had to force myself to remember a story I was trying to tell versus facts that I was trying to just, regurgitate. And what that did is it made the entire audience feel more connected to me, whether I was talking to 20 people again or 200.
And so you'd roll up your sleeve. Like, I'll never forget the time it happened. It was in California. We had a good time after it. We were so happy about it. We were just like celebrating this presentation because it was like she peeled off that layer of armor and she was like, do I have to be on a stage? And the organization was like, well, I guess not. And she was like, I'd like to walk. And she literally like gets on the floor and is starting to walk and is rolling.
Meaning off the stage. I didn't like lay down on the
No, sorry. You got off the stage and you had on a black jacket and you rolled up the sleeves and you're like, all right, let's talk. And you went into story mode. Mm-hmm. And then the presentation wasn't even like a presentation anymore. It was more like, I'm just going to share this with you, this story, and you can come along with me if you'd like. If this is
and it was a subject like social media or something.
Yes.
It was a very specific topic, and I remember us preparing for that. And you saw my slides, and I think you canned half of them.
Yes,
and then you took off words and you put in photos, and I literally felt like
vulnerable.
I was like, what are they going to learn by seeing that picture? And she's like, they're going to learn from what you have to say. And so, it was a journey that we went on together, but I think that's very important. And then obviously if you're speaking one-on-one to someone, and we can't say this enough, is if you want to connect with people and you want to create a lasting connection in that moment, you need to be personal and you need to care enough about that other person sitting across from you to be more personalized with either how they're doing, what you have something funny you want to share, but just truly trying to connect. And I think sometimes our presence, when we can just sit down and get right to it, while that doesn't mean we spend 15 minutes on the gab. We don't always have that. However, it takes a couple of minutes sometimes to make a meaningful connection. And that could be something simply as, how are you doing today? Or, oh my gosh, the funniest thing happened to me at Starbucks today. So it could be any of that version. And then I think too is finding ways, and a lot of this I've learned you can't prepare for. You've got to have a certain aspect inside of your consciousness that when you're in that meeting, whether you're, in that presentation or in that big keynote, to be aware when there are moments relative to connect with multiple people, a group of people. Maybe a group of people are having a side conversation over here and you call them out in a nice, fun way and break the ice, or you see a face that you recognize and you warm up the audience by saying, Kathy, I haven't seen you in forever. Thank you for joining. Like, stop what you're doing. Kathy, I can't wait to talk to you afterwards. It's been years since I've seen you. I mean, it could be any number of those things. Or you're starting the conversation with your team and you notice something unique or something you may want to point out in that opportunity, in that time. So using your instincts to make connections is really important. And I have learned that the more rehearsed those things are, the more false they are. And I always remember that. I always remember this as a kid, going to SeaWorld and watching one of those shows. Mm-hmm. And I been seeing those shows for years. And I always thought how cool it was when that person just randomly got picked out of the audience. Until guess what? I was the person one time. And they told me in advance, like I sat on something, they came and they were like, oh, you're the lucky person. And we had to go rehearse it. And I remember being excited that I was going to get to be on stage because, I'm a performer. But I thought all that happened on the fly. And it didn't, and it kind of bursted my bubble. Anyway, that was a side note of a little bit of childhood SeaWorld trauma. I have other SeaWorld trauma we can talk about another time. But what I would say is leave yourself open to organic, in the moment, authentic connection. That's very important. And often it's hard to do that if the subject matter is pretty heavy, but there are ways to connect with people and leave yourself that space to find those things, and that will improve your presence as a leader or authority figure, depending on what the circumstance is. And then I do too think that taking strategic pauses, and I can be the queen of long story long. In fact, we have stickers around here that say that. And I've had to learn to stop and literally be okay with a quiet moment, to let that sink in. And then also going back to, it's okay to repeat things. It's okay to say things over and over again. I mean, not to where we're beating the point to nauseam, and I'm very guilty of that at times. But I would say that finding a way to effectively repeat key points is important as well, because we can't expect that everyone's going to take it all in the first time. And so we know that as leaders, one of our key roles is chief repeat officers. So if we want to effectively improve our presence, we need to understand that that's part of the journey as an effective Self-Smarter leader. So.
And I know you and I used to get so frustrated about it.
As hell.
You know, I've said that 100 times. And then finally it was I would say that to you and you'd be like, say it again, say it again.
Yeah.
Which really is a good segue into just the one final tip, which is to close things with, to be clear, to close things with a wrap or recap of what we just, or what you really want people to hear. So it kind of brings all of this home. You just told me before we recorded this podcast that we got some feedback about the gaslighting episode.
Yes.
That there was a part where we kind of went off.
Yeah. In fact, to quote the friend that gave us that, and I appreciate it because, you know, this person is a huge fan of our podcast. So she listens to it. She gives us a lot of applause and thanks for what we're sharing. And in this particular instance, she's like, I felt like you went on for about 6 minutes more than you needed to in the middle of the episode. And you recovered at the end because you gave actionable steps for me to take.
Awesome.
Because this was not a topic I think she was extra excited about, and we were very open. We weren't excited about talking about it either, but it was important. But I appreciated that, and I think that can help us. That will help us. So thank you, listener and friend of ours. And then also, I think too, is the important part of her giving us that feedback was the importance of recapping.
That's right.
So I didn't just fixate on the fact that maybe I went on a little too long in the middle of the episode, but what she said helped her re-engage, because I guess we lost her for a hot minute there. Hopefully she got a coffee in that rant we went on. But I do think that that's important too when you're trying to improve your communications and your presence as a leader, is to find ways to repeat, recap,
that's right,
summarize, because that's what people are going to remember.
That's right. Exactly. And usually in this podcast, I'll ask you, what do you know for sure? Which is the opportunity for us to share with you listeners the big aha or the big thing we want you to have heard or walk away with if you haven't already done so.
Yep.
So it's funny. I had some notes in here about recap. So
okay, this
is not easy. This must be practiced.
Yes, this is not I don't know. This is a part of, this is a nuanced aspect of leadership. And the reason why is because I think it's so specific to each one of us.
Yeah.
Those of us who've decided to be a leader, it requires self-knowledge, self-awareness, and it requires the humility to ask people that are around you to observe you and to provide you with thoughtful input on how you're showing up. And so I think that that's why it must be practice. And you have to want to improve your presence.
You do.
You do. You can't just walk around with a title on a card and expect people to really, be moved by you. And we're committed at our company and in our personal lives to be leaders of humans, including ourselves. And so if you're in that same, which most of our listeners are in, we're all in this together. We have to think about these not necessarily these crystal clear aspects of leadership. These are things that are like I said, nuanced.
They are. And being conscious of it in the moment. And that's why it's an art form, which is one of the other things. It becomes an art form after you practice it. You must practice it and be aware of it.
Yep.
And the last thing is people need you to be a better leader in 2023.
Absolutely.
Our last episode was talking about trends coming up in 2023 relative to people finding themselves, wanting to change life trajectory and career and everything else. And so as leaders, we're in the wake of all of that.
Yeah.
How do you expect people to grow with you if you are not growing yourself?
Correct. Well said.
So take these steps, leaders, to sharpen your presence. And we appreciate you listening. Do you want to have any final comments?
I think we've covered everything because I sure don't want to. I don't want.
You don't want that feedback again?
No, ma'am. But no, I again appreciate that, and we want to put into practice what people share with us.
Yes,
and we're trying our best, and so it means a lot to us. So if anything, I'd like to end on is keep telling us.
Yes.
What you're finding helpful. Certainly, we love that. But then also things that could make this podcast better for all of us.
Right. Because as leaders, it helps us with our presence.
It does. So again.
Great. Okay. So for Music Moment, I don't think you have watched the show Chippendales. Have you watched the show Chippendales?
You mean like
the strip club? Yes.
No.
Are you shocked? Y'all, if you're not watching this on YouTube, her jaw is like, what?
Well, I'm just surprised we're having this conversation. I don't feel like
watch it.
I don't feel like I was briefed appropriately to talk about a strip club.
Well, let me tell you.
So this is a TV show.
It's a TV show. It's doing really well on Hulu. It is about the story of how Chippendales was started. It's a business story. Okay. So it's kind of like the one that we watched on Uber.
Yes.
But set in the 80s.
Okay.
And one of the benefits of watching a show that's set in the 80s is the music.
Which we've declared on this podcast is we think that was the best decade for music.
And I mean, I've got goosebumps right now just thinking about watching it and the songs that will come on, not necessarily while they're dancing, but as they hit on a big business point or something major happens, what they'll play, it's songs that I haven't heard in maybe 30 years.
So the music is, do you think the music is making the show popular?
I do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
And we're going to add a link in the show notes to, there's an article out there I found that has someone who has watched every episode and has documented every song from every episode.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love how music is really amplifying TV at this day and age. And I think it has, but I mean, we've talked about it in several instances where songs have been reemerged. What was the show where Kate Bush... Stranger Things.
Yes.
Stranger Things has done a really good job of incorporating music as one of the characters.
Yes.
And that's what I guess is happening with this show.
1,000% it is.
Okay. I'm guessing this is not a PG show.
No. No.
Okay.
I mean, I would.
I just want to throw a warning out there.
No, it's not.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't have your littles around for this one. But in terms of music, yes. But on that note about music becoming a character, it definitely is. And if you haven't seen it on CBS Sunday Morning, I know you haven't seen it because you would have said it. There's a whole story. I'll have to put it in the show notes as well.
Okay, good.
A gentleman who does this for a living. He does the intros for big shows like Game of Thrones.
Okay.
Like these big shows that are awarded for Emmys, and he's got Emmys for this. Oh, it's Succession he does. The show Succession on HBO, which you love that music.
Love it.
Well, they're talking to him about it. I just think this is so interesting because actually my son is interested in this as a career.
Oh, great.
Yes. Because he's like, you take the art form of the acting and you take the music away. And so he shows what that looks like in the Succession. Like he says, this is Succession without music.
Ooh.
And it's totally different.
Wow.
There's no underlying bass. you don't know that this is supposed to be a somber moment necessarily. You can't tell if they're joking or...
Especially in that particular show. Yeah.
And so then he goes, now here is what I would play. And he's playing the piano under it. And it's total. And he goes, now here I'll play something a little lighter and show you how that can change the same scene.
Oh, I'm fascinated. I cannot wait to watch this episode.
So
Thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
That alone that's incredible.
It's so good. But the point, you really brought it home, but is that how, is when music becomes a character, and in Chippendales, which I know the topic is a little awkward, but when you watch it, all of you, it's a leadership story, and it's so interesting. They play Diana Ross. They play Depeche Mode. I mean, when was the last time you got into some Depeche Mode?
Man, that's bringing back some memories.
I know. Talking Heads, the Cars. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. So look for that link to the Chippendales lineup of music in our show notes.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you for sharing that, because that gives me something exciting
to explore.
To explore. I will. All right.
So we're going to have our loaded show notes this week, y'all. We're going to have our face cream stuff in there, and we're going to have lists of music from Chippendales, and we're going to have backup. So
wow.
Tell a friend.
That's a fun show notes coming.
Tell a friend, and we send you into the week with grateful hearts.
Goodbye, everyone. As always, you can connect with us on Instagram and Facebook at Self Smarter Podcasts. You can also leave a rating or review if you enjoyed what you heard today. Not only does this mean so much to us, but it also helps other leaders and future leaders find our community. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us in becoming self-smarter. This podcast is produced by Snacks Media, and music is from a free platform. Well, that is until Brandy Carlisle reaches out to us to write the original score for our podcast. Friends, have a great rest of your day.